Hey, ladies, we're back together. Look, we're together in the same place. Woohoo! Well, I'm doing all woohoo, and we're going to just go into talk about grief. So perhaps the woohoo and the grief don't seem very aligned, but our talk today is going to all be about grief, isn't it, girls?
Yeah.
That's where we're going to start.
Yeah, we don't know where we're going to end up.
Yeah, I think I've lost my brother last week. So I had to fly home. It's been a really big month for me, and I think it has been for a lot of people, not for everyone. We're all moving in these waves, and for me, it's like the peristaltic push towards, something better. But in this last 6 weeks, um, I found out my father had been murdered, who I didn't grow up with. And then Salim, we moved into a new place, and almost immediately Salim had a bike accident and shattered his shoulder and has had to have reconstructive surgery. So that's been really big and quite debilitating for him, obviously. And then my brother, who was my younger brother, who was diverting his flight to come and spend a couple of weeks with us and help out, broke his leg almost straight after Salim's accident. He broke his leg on a boat in Thailand and had to be flown home on an emergency flight. And just when I thought it was sort of done and dusted, my older brother, Kurt, who was 57, passed away just over a week ago.
Oh my
So
God,
then
that's
I
been
had an
so
emergency
huge.
flight home and the funeral last week. And yeah, so I feel like there has been a lot of completion cycles happening. So I feel like the UK was a completion cycle for me. And I feel like finding out about my father was a completion cycle, and I feel like my brother is a completion cycle as well. So a lot of people have completed their cycles here on Earth. A lot of people have done what they need to do here, and they won't be returning after a long, long period of returning over and over. A lot of people are not going to be returning this time.
Mm.
So I think that's really interesting. I'm seeing that more and more. But yeah, the grief runs deep.
And grief isn't just about death, is it, Mel? It's grief can happen about anything. As you say, you just talked about completion cycles. And I think we complete cycles ourselves, don't we? Like you said you completed one in the UK. You used to live there 20 odd years ago. You went back, lived there for another year. You feel like you've completed a cycle. And I think people mistake grief for maybe losing a relationship or somebody passing away. There's definitely grief involved there, and that's the obvious grief. But there's grief involved in everything, isn't there? Like the old version of us, who we were last year, who we are no longer. There's an element of grief that we've got to accept and work through if we want to grow and transform and evolve.
And I
Yeah,
think it's change because we on a cellular level, we're dying all the time
Mm.
and we're rebirthing all the time. So that's regeneration. And we see that in nature all the time too. We have these, I mean, nature thrashes sometimes, and with the floods that we've seen, I went to the Coromandel not long ago. Well, actually, it was last year. And when I went out into the Ngāhere for a walk in the bush, um, it was actually really disturbing to me because I've been going there since I was a baby and it's always been so lush and dense and it was just so sparse.
Yeah.
But within that, the solace was, and that's what you've always got to look for, is a different perspective. I could see all this new life coming up, and it was our natives. They were reseeding and coming back, and they will bring that cover again and that huge nourishment with it that we will benefit from. But I think we're always grieving, like you say, and it's that layers. And I was talking about this because I've been doing a leadership summit, high vibe leadership summit, and my talk was all about remember me, being the miraculous miracle you are. But within that, to be a leader, we need to lead people through change and through grief, because in a company and business, it's always rebirthing and we're losing people, and so loss comes in so many ways.
It does.
We need to find new ways to build new ways forward and, release the old. And I think a lot of people find it difficult, that release bit, because until
Yeah.
we've released, the doors and the light don't really open. We've got to fully release that grief. And as
Mm,
well,
right.
when we're
Yeah.
in that grief, the feeling, we don't like the feeling and we
Mm,
try to run from these feelings. But when we actually feel that, what we're feeling is unconditional love.
Because
mm,
and we're not taught how to grieve, are we? We're not even really taught about grief, are we? We, used to see movies where widows or widowers would be there and they're black and they'd sit in black for a year, and and they're supposed to cry and not look up and whatever, and the old Italian way, I guess. But that's not grief in itself, is it? That's just a portrayal of something. Grief is actually just allowing ourselves to feel. Like,
Mm.
you just said, Mel, before we got online, like
Mm.
how you are okay most of the time, and you have this beautiful belief. You speak to spirit. You understand the life cycle more than most people, which is a gift, I guess. But you still got this humanness of sadness that your big brother isn't. You can't just give him a call and speak to him anymore.
yeah, that's right. And I think, we are taught that death is something to fear, and we're taught that death is not natural. And so, one of the big things that's been highlighted over the last few years is everyone's absolute terror of death, which is really, just taking another form. We are just reshaping and regrouping and shape shifting. So, if you really don't believe in anything else, then yes, you're going to be terrified of death because you think this is it and you've got to hold on to it for as long as you can. Um, the reasons people go are varied. Some people choose to go, and some people have finished their contracts, and some people were only contracted here for a very short period of time. And coming to terms with that at the human level is obviously very complex. But like you say, Bridget, every part of us is dying and regenerating all the time. And in a way, we are grieving lots of things all the time. And I guess this is, like the moon cycles, right? The new moon and building up to the full moon, and then the regeneration of that cycle over and over, like the period cycles and the moving into menopause is grieving, the fertility of us and the rebirthing, that is able to take place before that. I mean, it is everything at all times, and the only thing that is constant is change. And so the most beautiful thing we can learn to do is to be accepting and welcoming of change.
And that in itself, change is transformation. And energy is never ever lost. It only ever transforms. And I think this whole thing that we've had around death has just created this fear and this scarcity model. And it's like become a competition. We don't even know why we're doing half the things that we do, because it's just this fear that we're driven to do them. And I think we have to see death in a different way. I may have shared this story with you before, but one of my mentors, Zach Bush, he was out swimming and he went out about 2 miles out to sea, and he saw this big grey thing coming towards him, and he basically said, "Oh my God, I'm fucked." And then next thing, he was surrounded by this beautiful school of little fish. And he said he became one with them. Not one of the fish hit him or touched him. And as he moved, they moved as one. But then he felt like these bombs were going off, and it was pelicans diving into the water eating the fish, and so he tried to interfere, but the fish spoke to him because he'd become one with them and said, no, this is our journey. We want to become the energy of the pelican's wings. And that's just beautiful. We have death so wrong
Mm.
and
Yeah.
grieving so wrong. You know, we need to surrender to the pain of everything that we do. You know, there is pain in being human, but if we have too much pain, that we don't have that balance. It's like the cycles. At the moment, we're in equinox, right? Where daylight hours are exactly the same, or yesterday was the equinox, where daylight hours are the same as moonlight hours. It really highlights the balance
Mm.
and of the cycles. It always comes back into those balances. May take a while, but that's where we need to see. And I think, you know, when we look at the moonlight hours, it's where a lot of our emotions come up. A lot of this pain can come through the shadow work, whatever you want to, you know, wherever you want to put it. But in the darkness is where we can really, really see the light and feel our way through to find that light again. So,
But you know, like it's we're all believers of other things other than just what's here on earth and what we can visually see and feel and touch and taste. So we are blessed in a way that we have our own beliefs, and you know, we see different things and we understand that we believe that we are a soul here doing this human experience. But I think when we're talking about grief, especially, I think we do really have to honor our humanness, because
Yes.
we are here to feel. You know, our soul was desperate to get down to earth for, because this is one of the biggest evolutions our soul can ever take. And if we can grasp that concept and then look at the world like it is one big giant playground for our soul's evolution, then grief is part of that, and grief is a daily thing, as is healing, as is forgiving. You know, we talk about these concepts all the time, but we are human, and
Yeah.
every single emotion is okay to be felt. So, but there's no rules about grief. And I think, you know, somebody wrote that thing, didn't they, that there's 5 steps of grief, you know, the anger, the whatever. I don't necessarily believe that. You know, you can, you have to go what's in line with you. And if some
you
days
can
you're
go
in,
like this too.
totally, it can pendulum, it can swing. But you know, like I remember interviewing somebody saying, oh, you know, it was Jane Weeks. She'd lost her 3 beautiful children in the Doha fire. And I remember talking to her about the statistics about husband and wife splitting up, and she got quite fiery about it. And she's like, you know, why does that need to be a statistic kind of thing? You know, we stuck together. We both made those twins. I can understand why the statistics are there, because people don't know how to deal with their emotions. But I think this is what this is really about. You know, as we're talking about grief, how do we just sit and feel, because we're so programmed to not sit in discomfort?
That's right. And I'll tell you what happened when my brother died. I had the call from my niece, and I went into shock, and she was in shock, but she was very, very upset. And because she had been with him and the police were still there and there was lots going on. So I hung up and went into shock, and then I walked outside to take a breath, and I was standing under just in the back car park of the building, and just a sky, clear blue sky, not a tree anywhere near me, and a tiny white feather just fell very, very slowly right in front of my eyes. And my brother connected with me, and I'm very lucky because I connected with my mum very soon after death, and she showed me lots and lots of visions, and I connected with my brother almost instantly as well. And he had a deep, deep love of birds his entire life. Our whole place, and I spoke of this at the funeral, our whole place was, he dug up the garden to make a duck pond for a duck that he had found on the farm across the road that had been shot in the eye. He was endlessly coming home with birds and injuries and things to stick in his aviary, and he had homing pigeons, and I mean, it was just like insane amounts of birds our whole childhood. So, and that's gone right through. It's never ended. He even right in central Christchurch, he had chickens, and he told me roosters were banned because they make too much noise in the city, and I mean, it's just never ended. So here's this tiny white feather, but very, very slowly and gently falling in front of me. And then what happened was I had to book the flight, obviously, and get myself back for the funeral. So then I started eating, and I couldn't stop eating for days. Like, I called it the Kurt hole. And because I was reaching for everything, but I couldn't get any satisfaction from anything, but I couldn't stop. So, and I was an observer of this. I could see what was happening. I knew what was happening, but I still allowed it to happen. And I ate lots of things that, I shouldn't eat. And that went on for days. But I allowed myself to do it because in one way it was helping to numb me enough to do all the things I needed to do, which was to get over there to assist, to help with the organization, and it also was just such an automatic response, right? Because this is what we are. We are programmed into automatic responses. And for many of us, automatic responses is eating the comfort food. And so I was stuffing that down, couldn't feel any of it. It wasn't even touching any sides. I couldn't feel any of it, but couldn't stop. And had the funeral, and even at the funeral and the open casket and things, the viewing the day before, I still couldn't connect in fully. And then the day after the funeral, we had at the crematorium, we had a very private, very small, only a few of us went for the final private family just farewell. And that was where I found it. And that day I didn't eat. I had no desire to eat. It was like I knew that was where I would be allowed to let go when everyone was gone, and it was just about 6 or 8 of us. And I went into the chapel, and I hadn't eaten anything, and I sat down, and I was able to grieve fully for I couldn't stop. I was just hysterically sobbing for like an hour. And then we all went out, and we had a coffee, and we had, a donut, and and we just reminisced and laughed and, celebrated him. And then we went home, and it was really, really beautiful. So I needed that, I was getting worried about finding my tears, and that day, all the energies know exactly what you need.
It's about trusting, isn't it?
Yeah, you
Like
trust.
but
And
also
so
not
I
get
trusted that it was okay to eat and eat and eat,
yeah.
because I knew I needed to hold it together through that period.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
like
I trusted my body when it said, now you don't need to eat, because now you can let go.
yeah.
And that allowed me to let go. So yeah, trusting in that process is huge.
Oh, it's
And
like it
it's,
made me cry.
I know, and there's so much psychology in that, the psychology of nutrition, the psychology of food, and the different things, because we don't connect all of these things. We're such this holistic being. And just listening to the way you spoke, you couldn't get satiety, satisfied or satiated through anything. You wouldn't have been able to get that through anything until you had that release. And it's almost like you need to surrender. surrender to what's happening. The universe will always allow it to unfold for you and hold you anyway. We've been not given the ability to build trust in that, in ourselves. And it's really bringing it back to that. We're such light beings. We know, we have this deep intrinsic knowing, and you know, being in spaces like that, just intrinsically you know what to do.
But
And
again,
grief is such a private thing, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
it's sort of, you're so alone in your grief,
Yeah.
and you can have comfort, but it's a very solitary feeling, I find, and I see it around me. Everybody grieves, even if we're giving each other a big hug and we're all having a moment, it's still a very solitary thing to process, and it comes from such a deep well of emotion. It's such a deep, it's sort of like you've gone down, 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 down into the soul, and then you've pulled it back up and released it. And it's so important for healing to allow yourself to grieve well and deep.
Yeah, and to because we're in the world where we love to distract ourselves, aren't we? From everything that feels bad, uncomfortable. Anything that feels remotely icky, we are so good at looking for an alternative way to feel, whether that's just flicking on Netflix and mindlessly watching a series so you don't have to think, but actually honoring yourself. And we've talked about this before, but we know that once something happens, you often do go into shock and survival mode, and you probably feeding and eating is part of your survival mode, wasn't it, until you could come back to being thriving again. And we'll all deal with that slightly differently, and that's okay, as you say. But all of our emotions are very individual. I'll feel happiness different than you'll feel happiness. They're all unique because we've all got our own unique filters, don't we? But it's just about, I think it's just about giving yourself space and allowing some time in solidarity, I would say. Some time in introspection, and just always tuning back in with yourself. And one of the most important questions is, how am I feeling today? What can I do for myself today? I don't think we ask ourselves those questions enough. How am I really truly feeling? You see people in the street and you go, hey, how are you? You see your friend, you'll go to your sister-in-law and how are you? And you really want to know how they are, and you do actually really care, but how often are we doing it for ourselves?
And honoring that, I think we don't give ourselves or our bodies the gratitude that they carry us, they show us all of these, feelings. Our body's way of talking to us. And, we're in body structure and biology, 70-80% water. And when we look in Māori, it's wairua. Wai is water, rua is two. Wairua is the spirituality. That's who we are. And the two moving through the wairua are the physical and the emotional. So that's what makes up the spiritual self. And so we have to honor both the emotional and the physical. And I was on another podcast this morning, and we were talking about having, the grief of not only, it's not just our grief, we're picking up the grief of the planet, of the collective.
Yes.
And it piles on. Like, you've had such a journey over the last month or so, but it's almost like it's an accumulation of being able to atone yourself, to be able to really respond and have surrender to that. Because if you don't, and when you talk about the isolation, we're all on this karmic journey unique to ourselves. When we're doing this ourselves, we can surrender to that, have ourselves in that space, but still be part of that collective as well, and holding that space for it. It's observing, but it's observing ourselves, observing what's going on out here, and being able to sit with that in a space that we can, because if we don't bring that collective in, if we stay alone in that lonely space, that's where most dis-ease comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I said my children have, said, or people say, "Yeah, how are you feeling?" And your automatic response would be, "I'm okay."
Mm.
But I've been just saying, "I feel sad."
Yeah.
Like I feel sad.
Yeah.
It's just how I feel, and it's okay to be sad. I don't have to tell people I'm feeling okay. Um, I'm just sad, and that is a very natural part of loss, is to be sad.
It's really
And
powerful to name it as well, though, isn't it? And this is one of the things I always go through with my clients, no matter what we're going through, when we're doing feeling to healing, name your emotion. Sometimes it's anger, isn't it? Sometimes it's frustration. Sometimes it's just downright whatever, but name it. As you say, I feel sad. And as the collective around us, we've also got to get comfortable with people not being okay, not being fine. Most people are walking around saying that they're fine or okay when actually they are dying inside, and I mean, we're talking about death of things as well and death of things, but people are actually crumbling inside with their emotions because they're not okay. So the more we can actually name the feeling that we're feeling, all of a sudden we're back in almost a place of empowerment, because I
yes,
feel sad and
absolutely.
it's okay to feel sad. I'll own that. And I'm going to
Yeah,
sit with that and I'm going to allow myself to be sad, because that is honoring me, honoring whatever has gone before me, whatever I've lost. I just think naming the emotion is so powerful, and using the words out loud is extra powerful.
absolutely. Yeah, it really frees your throat chakra and changes the vibratory state of the vocal cords to be able to express and name. And we are moving hopefully out of this sort of need to project ourselves as superwomen, uh, out to the public, as though we can handle 4 kids and a nightmare ex and breakups and deaths, and and it's all just taken in our stride, and oh well, we just get on with it. And in true Indigenous cultures, and the West really has sort of lost their way there. In Indigenous cultures, there's a lot of ritual and sacred energy around big transitional times, where these are sort of, that like the spiral of community comes together. And this is where it was so, at this tangi, it was so um, amazing to see this beautiful Māori family step right in and support us, because my brother's wife is Māori, and they are, just so community minded, so whānau minded, and everyone is involved in this huge big wave of energy and support. And then it sort of folds out again, as we release, and then it folds in again as we go through these big transitions in life. And that's really, something we need to step back into more and more, I think, is
Yeah.
that knowing when to step in and support and hold, and knowing when to step back and release and allow.
I love what you've just said about like the ceremony and things like that, because you're right. You think about even like when children turn 16, there's often a celebration in some cultures, isn't there? Because you've left your childhood behind you now, in a new stage of your life. And again, when we're talking about grief here, we are talking about death more predominantly in this episode, but grief is another stage of life, isn't it? You leave one job into another, there's a grief. You leave one relationship to be either on your own or another relationship, there is grief. And that's why I love ritual and I love ceremonies. I love them. I love working with the moon. I love doing like sound bowl things or whatever, just whatever feels right in the moment, whether it's getting up and dancing with a group of crazy other women, but turn it into something. I remember when a boyfriend moved out, and I just said to my girlfriends, hey, I need to cleanse my house. Do you want to come and help me? And it was really just, I cleaned everything, but it was a ceremony. We cleansed it, we saged it, we laughed. I did most of the cleaning, by the way. I'd already done it, but it just got me on the way to doing it. But they came around, and it was to fill the space with a different energy, to say goodbye to that chapter of my life and close the door without any regret, without any remorse, without any bitterness, but just to say, I've learnt my lessons there, and to move on. And so it doesn't all have to be around a campfire with drums and bongos. It can be, you can make your own rituals and ceremonies, can't you? And I think, we always leave our listeners with 3 tips. And I think about, my tip now will be, think about what you can do in grief. How can you turn it into a ceremony? It might be with a loved one. Is it write them a note if they've gone, tell them anything you couldn't tell them while they were alive, and then sit there and burn it, and know that they've got your message, and sit there with them in your heart, or dance around the fire naked, for all I care, but turn it into a ceremony. Do something that's ritualistic, that you can then, put your grief, put it in, honor it, put all that energy, and that would be my tip to leave people with. What about you, Bridge?
I think, gosh, we do have to honor all of our feelings, and make sure that we've, you talk about cleanse, but we also need to cleanse the interior, because we hold these, it's layers. And I think we started off talking a little bit about layers, like the layer of the onion. Each layer will bring a tear as you unfold it, and it's showing that respect for ourselves to go that layer deeper. We have this grief that comes in from external, and we think that's the only grief in life, but too much we're holding within, and we're not actually allowing that free flow of energy. So, in Chinese medicine, they say grief is held in the lungs. In Maori, we say that, we hold memory under our skin and our fascia. But I actually think we hold grief in every cell. And it's how we talk too, because this vibrational energy, it's all good to be sad. It's all good to recognize that feeling, but that's actually not going to define our way forward. We feel the emotion in that time. We honor it. We honor ourselves for being able to feel that, but we get off the floor and we move on. And we get up and do it again, and we do it again. We become stronger and resilient, and that's what makes us these light beings. We're so light, and it's that energy that's creating the loss and transformation, the change, and the shape shifting to where we'll be more stronger.
You talked about cleansing the inside, but we will do another recording about cleanses and things like that, and we will go deeper into our emotions in another recording. So cleanse from the inside, ritualistic. What's your tip to help people work through grief, Mel?
Well, I'm not a big fan of stuff, but I took my brother's last book that he was in the middle of reading, that was on the sofa that he always sat on the deck outside at the farm. And I asked his wife if I could take that book, and so that will be something I keep. That will be my connection to him, and I think it's always nice to have a connection. I've got a little vial of my mum's ashes. And so my way of connecting with your grief is to connect with the person, to talk to the person. So I talk to my brother quite a bit, and I talk to my mum quite a lot as well. And sometimes I talk out loud, and sometimes I'm having a chat in my head, and sometimes I'm asking for a sign, or I'm asking them to step forward and help me. And if you have lost a loved one, I think that it's really lovely. I mean, we've just had fantails driving us crazy nonstop at the funeral of both my mum and my brother. There was one just literally coming up against the window constantly all through the funeral, and for days after, coming onto the deck and everything. But and we know that they carry the you know, the souls of our ancestors. But if you give them something to work with, so for example, my mum, her initials are JMD, and I said to her, okay, every time I see JMD, I'm going to know that's you popping in, and I'm going to give you triple J as well, because you know, I want, like, if it's hard to access that one, you can also come in via a triple J. And it will always be when I'm right in the middle of you know, a stressful period, or trying to work something out, or, you know, she's definitely been around a lot. I've seen these two quite a bit in the last week, with my brother passing, and you know, so I know that she's stepping in to support us at this time as well. So you will be able to connect so much deeper with them and hold them correctly in your heart if you give them something to work with, because they are trying to connect with us all the time in spirit. And if they have an in, you know, that's a thread that you've thrown out to the cosmic web that they are able to attach in on, because it's an electromagnetic pulse, it's a thought. And that's much easier for them to connect to than the density of our physical grief. So if you give them something to work with and then start chatting to them, then you can solidify a really beautiful relationship with them in spirit as well.
Oh, I love that. I love all of it. Thank you. And I'm so sorry about your brother. And I'm so sorry to anybody who's listening if you're dealing with loss. But as Bridget said, we do deal with it. We get back up and we will do it again, because the human spirit is
resilient.
Oh my gosh, never ceases to amaze me what we can endure, what we can get through, and how we can thrive on the other side. So we are sending you lots of love. Mwah.
Yeah.